In Path of Exile 3.10, you can animate blades that have been left on the ground by blade skills such as Ethereal Knives and Bladefall. In addition to that, the new Spellslinger Support is perfect for bringing some automated utility into your build. If you want to know how my setup works, I'll explain it in this video real quick. Hi guys, CatMaster here with another video. I hope you're safe at home and not infected yet, and I hope you continue to stay safe and have some great time with this most amazing 3.10 league Delirium that we're playing. I made an Animate weapon character. I've been playing a lot of Animate weapon Chains of Command in 3.9, and I knew that with the changes to Animate weapon, I really wanted to play this build on League Start, because finally you're able to level and play in all content as Animate weapon, which previously wasn't really possible. But before we go into this video, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. This is the only way YouTube channels can stay competitive against the algorithm and against the large corporations that are being favored by YouTube. If you would like to support me in my quest for making more quality YouTube content, I do have a Patreon page that you can pledge to. Thank you guys all for the support. You've been nothing but amazing, and I want to welcome all the new subscribers to the channel. So, Animate Weapon is a skill that animates weapons on the ground to fight as a temporary minion along your side. Previously, you really needed a physical weapon on the ground that dropped from an enemy, or that you bought from the shop or took out of your stash and dropped onto the ground. Now, blade skills such as Ethereal Knives and Bladefall will leave blades on the ground that you can then animate. Those are called lingering blades, and they get an additional bonus flat physical damage from the Animate weapon gem. So not only the normal flat fizz that applies to all weapons that you animate, but also a little bit extra that is very helpful. Overall, Animate weapon has been changed so that the maximum of animated weapons is slightly lower. You are able to animate up to 15 weapons at gem level 21. I don't know where you get weapons 16 or 17. I'd have to check that on the wiki. But that means performance is way better, and GGG has compensated by actually making the more damage multiplier work and giving them more attack speed. In addition, we got the new Spellslinger Support, which is a skill support that will turn linked active skills into a reservation. Each skill will reserve 20 mana base, and whenever you use a wand attack, you will then trigger all the linked active skill gems that you reserved with Spellslinger, which is really cool. It has a small internal cooldown of half a second, so it's not super spammy, but you can reliably proc skills with this, and it's a big quality of life. Now, before we went into this league, I had the idea that I would want to put the Spellslinger on the Animate weapon in my 6th link, and then I would want a trigger wand. You know, a wand with the Betrayal mod, trigger socketed spells when you use a skill. And that's where I would have put my utility skills. That is my corpse generation via Desecrate, my blade generation via Bladefall for being able to animate those, and the buff from Flesh Offering. But obviously, in the beginning of the league, you don't have a trigger wand. You don't have that trigger mod unless you're lucky and you find a Poet's Pen. I'm playing as usual in hardcore solo self-found, so I depend entirely on my drops and on what I can craft with the vendor recipes or with my currency. But yeah, it's incredible how easily you can set up a working Animate weapon build now. I think as early as Act 3 it's viable. You do get Animate weapon in the end of Act 1 already, and at that point you already have Ethereal Knives. However, on my second playthrough, after I had died in Act 3 on my first character,
come, step into my world of twisted illusion. Witness the birth of...
So after this death on my second playthrough, I didn't care much about being fast anymore, and I was like, okay, let's just see how Animate Weapon feels when we just start right when we get it, right? And it doesn't feel as good as the other approach that I had, which was leveling with SRS Infernal Legion melee splash and then swapping the melee splash for melee physical damage in Act 2 and replacing the Infernal Legion with minion damage later on when the Infernal Legion damage seemed to fall off and seemed to be more counterproductive, because Infernal Legion does put a debuff on the minions and lets them burn down so they die down faster. At some point in Act 2 I felt it was more efficient to not use Infernal Legion. But either way, once you're in Act 3, once you have access to all the skill gems in the library, it is really, really efficient to play the setup like I'm playing it right now. And that is putting Spellslinger on Desecrate and on Bladefall and on Flesh Offering. So basically a 4-link, right, with Spellslinger and the 3 utility abilities for the build. This will reserve 60% of mana, but whenever I use a wand attack, not only my Kinetic Bolt, but also just any default wand attack, it will trigger all 3 socketed skills, which is incredibly powerful, as you can imagine, because 1 click, 3 abilities cast, and out of the way. Perfect. It doesn't matter that I don't have space for support gems on those abilities, because they don't need to be augmented. They're good as they are. So, another thing that kept me from putting Spellslinger on my animated weapons, other than, you know, the need for Spellslinger on my utility skills, is the lack of sockets early on. Spellslinger does consume a support gem slot that could otherwise be damaged, and animated weapons with a really low maximum of animated weapons, it goes up as you level and it only reaches 15 at 21. It starts at like 6 or 7 weapons, I think, at level 1, and there's really no need to automate it because the weapons last for a while, right? I got 1 duration cluster on the tree now, and I got the Necromancer duration and I got the Minion duration here, and my weapons last for more than 100 seconds. So if you just resummon one every couple seconds, you will always be at your maximum, assuming they don't die. So what I did in Act 3 is I found a Minion helmet, or I found a helmet with a 4-link, right? And then used the recipe that you can find on the wiki in order to craft a +1 Minion helmet. So that's a little bit complicated, but I'll show it on screen right here, and I'll link it in the comments down below or in the description, more likely. The comments are, of course, for you guys to leave questions and to give input suggestions for this build. You can craft a +1 Minion helmet. There is a recipe for it, so you make sure that you got a 4-link with the right colors that you want. Early on, I would assume you want Animate Weapon, which is a green gem, you want Minion Damage, Minion Speed, and Melee Splash. Later on, you're going to use Impale, because they're pure physical minions, but that setup depends on you getting Impale chance from a Dread Banner and elsewhere, so I would recommend not using Impale that early, but you can. It is just really, you want the minion speed early on because they don't have a lot of movement speed, and minion speed makes it much easier for the minions to get from monster to monster and from pack to pack, and you'll have to use Convocation less frequently. A +1 Minion helmet. You vendor a blue helmet with the right socket setup, together with a life flask of animation, which is the one that restores life to your minions, and an orb of alteration. Now, if you don't have a life flask of animation, you can craft a life flask of animation by vendoring a bone spirit shield with an orb of transmutation and a life flask to create a life flask of animation that you can then use in your recipe with the blue helmet and the orb of alteration to create a +1 minion gem helmet. This will last you pretty much until you're in maps. As early as, I think, item level 65, you can get +2 minion gems, but there is no recipe for +2 minion gems. I took this helmet and I alked it, and I was super lucky to get +2 minion gems, dexterity and max life, which was very helpful, and I'm going to be using this for quite a while until I find an upgrade. But there's no way to target craft this or to target farm this. Let me quickly go over the setup here in terms of triggering, because I'm using the kinetic bolt wand attack. Like I said, with Spellslinger, you can use your basic wand attack in order to trigger the supported gems. I'm using kinetic bolt, and I'm linking it with curse on hit, vulnerability to apply a debuff to my enemies, and I'm using culling strike to be able to kill enemies with 10% life or less when I'm in a boss fight. That could, you know, cut the last 10% of the boss fight off, and that is very helpful. Early on, I was using poison, and I was running a unlinked Herald of Agony in order to just have some extra damage. The Agony Crawler, even without any support gems, does quite a bit of damage, and it adds to the mix. It's just a nice component when you have a couple of weapons and the Agony Crawler. It's really helpful. I managed to find a Matua Tupuna, which I'm putting my Spectres in. If you watched my Herald of Purity and my Herald of Agony video from last week, where I played a Juggernaut, then you remember that there is utility Spectres called the Host Chieftain and the Stygian Silverback that you can summon in Act 6, the Riverways, and the Host Chieftain generates power charges for nearby allies, and the Stygian Silverback generates frenzy charges for nearby allies. Now, their charge generating spells do use mana, and they do have a problem with their mana pool, so you do need to use the blood magic support on those minions in order to enable them to spam their charge generating spells. Otherwise, you will not permanently have charges up. I'm also using Feeding Frenzy on those minions in order to grant the Feeding Frenzy buff, which is a global buff to all my minion damage, minion movement speed, and minion attack and cast speed. It also turns them aggressive, so they're more likely to hit enemies. They walk away from me and they go out of their way to attack the enemy, which can be counterproductive, but again, Feeding Frenzy is just such a strong buff that you want a source of it somewhere. I could also put it onto my Carrion Golem. I'm using a Carrion Golem here, unlinked, just in order to get some flat physical damage. Carrion Golems grant flat physical damage for non-golem minions, which is incredibly good on the animated weapons, as you may imagine. They benefit from the flat fizz quite a bit. I run my animated weapons with Impale, with melee splash and minion damage now. I'm also running a Dread Banner, which grants myself and nearby allies 20% chance to impale. So between the impale support and the Dread Banner, my minions are at 60% chance to impale, and I managed, after a long time of farming, I farmed like 20 or 30 cluster jewels, I managed to finally get a minion cluster jewel, and I rolled this, so I got Call to the Slaughter, which is minion damage, and minions created recently have attack and cast speed and movement speed. Rotten Claws for a 20% chance to impale on hit with attacks for my minions, and Raise and Pillage, which is honestly not that great in my build because my minions are pure fizz, but it is 6% of fizz as extra fire, which is more damage in the end. I'm also putting a Ghastly Eye Jewel here with flat life, minion damage, and minion flat damage, but later on obviously I'm going to use a medium jewel or a small jewel that I can put in here. Just right now, I'm very happy with the setup as it is. Now, this is my tree. I started connecting here, later on gave up this connection in order to connect here and to grab the Jewel Socket and Grave Pact, but I'm not 100% sure whether this will be the final tree. I may actually, in endgame, path along this socket to grab another large Jewel Socket, even though these elemental damage nodes don't do anything for my build. And you can pick up an additional curse, which could be incredibly helpful both for my own and my minion survivability, as well as for their offensive capability, because if I'm able to apply temporal chains, for example, enemies will move around less, and especially in minion move and attack cast speed maps or like turbo maps, it is kind of tricky for the weapons to stick on the enemy if they walk around really fast or if they port around. So getting an additional curse, applying temperature chains would be both an offensive and defensive buff, but I heard from other people playing Animate Weapon that there is some problems with the minion survivability on animated weapons. They complained that a lot of mechanics killed their weapons, so it may be necessary to actually use Enfeeble to reduce the enemy damage. Along those lines, I also thought it might be nice to run Fortify on my animated weapons, or maybe even Minion Life, as the top end damage is not a problem at all in the build. You can easily get a couple of million Shaper DPS on an animated weapon build, especially later on when you're actually using a higher link setup. Right now, as I said, just using a 4 link on a +2 helmet. In the Ascendancy tree for the Necromancer, which is the Ascendancy that we picked for this, just because it's such incredible value for a minion build on League Start, we of course go with Mistress of Sacrifice first, which makes our Flesh Offering affect ourselves. So with a slightly reduced effect, Flesh Offering will not only buff the attack, move, and cast speed of my minions, but also of my character, which is incredibly helpful for positioning and for zooming through maps without getting killed by delirium, ground effects, and monsters. Then on Cruel Lab, we get Mindless Aggression for movement speed, damage, attack, and cast speed. This is nothing special, but this is more a stepping stone into Merciless and Uber Lab we're getting. In Merciless Lab, we went for Bone Barrier. Bone Barrier grants you the level 20 Bone Armor skill, which is incredibly useful. It also grants you physical damage reduction per minion, which caps out at 10%, but since we usually have more than 10 minions, this is always up. And it gives you increased recovery rate. It also makes your minions slightly more survivable by giving them more max life. But really, the highlight here is the Bone Armor skill. Bone Armor is a guard skill. Similar to Steel Skin, it grants you 2,209 as a shield, right? And 70% of the damage from hits is taken from the buff before life or energy shield, meaning you effectively gain 2,200 EHP for a couple of seconds. I don't know what the base duration is, but mine is 6 seconds right now. I do assume it does scale with the duration from the tree. Yes, it does. And that's of course incredibly powerful because in the Animate Weapon build, you oftentimes take two skill effect duration clusters, but at least one, right? And then for Uber Lab, we're going to go for Unnatural Strength +2 level of all minion skill gems, which will make the survivability of my minions even better. It will maybe enable me to reach the level where you get a 3rd Spectre and maybe another animated weapon or 2, combined with the plus level of all physical spell skill gems on my wand and maybe on an amulet later on. Bone Barrier is definitely way better than Unnatural Strength for Merciless Lab. I was tempted to take Unnatural Strength, but Bone Barrier makes it so much easier to get through the Uber Lab trials in maps, and in general, like, survivability is of course very, very big in hardcore. Anything else I need to talk about? Flesh and Stone. Flesh and Stone is an awesome aura. I'm running it in the Blood Stance, which maims nearby enemies, and enemies maimed by this skill take increased physical damage, which obviously benefits all my physical damage from the minions. Because unlike my Animate Weapon Chains of Command build from last league, which was purely elemental, purely fire damage, this is a pure physical build. Just important to point out to get everyone on the same page, right? I also have a Convocation to get my minions out of dangerous situation and to just keep up with my moving speed, right? To get them in front of me when I walk into a pack so that they instantly can deal damage and instantly remove the threat. And I'm looking to run a Precision, but I don't have the free mana for a Precision because I only got 45 unreserved mana at the moment. But if I can, I would run the Precision, so I get a little bit of crit chance and a little bit of accuracy on my minions. Should be helpful, is not necessary. Also Val Summon Skeletons and a Val Haste Val Haste is with increased duration, so it lasts for 10.4 seconds at the moment. And Val Summon Skeletons are just the oh shit button, right? On bosses, it's massively helpful. Even though they don't have any support gems, they do a lot of damage. And obviously they benefit from these new minion passives that I put onto the tree here. Cluster Jewels, incredibly useful. I'll make a video on Cluster Jewels, but this video is already way over time. So if you have any questions about the build, make sure to pop by on twitch.tv/CatmasterOP, where I should be streaming every day, 12 hours plus for this week, maybe the next week. There's really not that much else to do for me, because we have to stay at home and stay put. We have to prevent the corruption through the coronavirus. Now we have to prevent the spread of the virus, and that's really what we have to do. So even if you guys think it's a great idea to use your new free time gained by, you know, the government closing schools or closing like events being cancelled and stuff, guys, stay at home, do not meet up, do not go in town. Try to be reasonable. Even if you're not part of the risk group for the coronavirus, it is confirmed to be a much more problematic virus than the flu, which I often hear people say, oh, they're not closing down airports for the flu, but now for this they do. Coronavirus is new. We don't know exact things yet. It may take years to develop a vaccine. For the flu, we do have a vaccine, and generally speaking, whenever the flu evolves and there's a new flu, then we can be sure to have a vaccine within a year. But with coronavirus, we don't know yet at all. And I'm not a scientist, I'm not educated on this matter, so take it with a grain of salt, but just make informed decisions, guys. Don't be stupid, learn scientific methods, don't believe anything just people post on social media, read proper articles, check sources, inform yourself, and don't be idiots. That's it for me on that topic. Thank you guys so much for watching, thanks for all the support. Like I said, there will be 2 or more videos per week from now on. The sad times are over. Like I'm definitely out of my end of the league depression last league, and there's a lot of things that I want to talk about in relation to Path of Exile. So stay tuned, subscribe to the channel, check the live stream, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.